In the future, after a devastating alien invasion, the Earth has been overrun. As the conflict intensifies, battle lines are drawn between nations, between families, and even between friends. Only a fighter with unwavering dedication will be able to end this war once and for all. Metal Unit is an action platformer with roguelite elements. In it, you play as Hannah, the pilot of a powerful mechanized combat suit who has been tasked by a clandestine organization to fight the armies of aliens that have invaded Earth. During the game, you'll be fighting your way through a variety of 2D stages, with each one being divided into a series of levels, all of them filled with monsters and traps. Most of these levels will require you to defeat all on-screen enemies before you can proceed, although occasionally you will find bonus levels that contain puzzles or special hidden treasure chests as well. At regular intervals through the stage, you'll encounter rest areas, where you can buy new weapons and equipment for your character, or craft new items using materials that you've already found. If you make it all the way to the end of a stage, you'll encounter a powerful boss monster, and defeating them will unlock the next area. Now, the combat in Metal Unit is classic 2D action material. Your character can run and jump around the level, moving up or down on various platforms, and engage enemies with ranged weapons or close combat melee attacks. As you fight and defeat enemies, you build up energy, which can be used to power your special ultimate attack that deals massive damage. You also have a defensive dash ability, which, if timed properly, allows you to dash away from or through enemy projectiles. As you make your way through each area, you'll also be able to pick up treasure. Loot crates scattered around the environment will randomly drop new weapons, armor, equipment, and consumables. Meanwhile, regular enemies will drop money, which you can collect and then use in rest zones to purchase equipment from vendors. And finally, there are upgrade points, which you get from rare chests or from defeating bosses. These allow you to unlock passive benefits for your character, such as increased health or damage, and they carry over between each playthrough, since, as I mentioned before, Metal Unit is also a roguelite. As with other games in the genre, the distribution of loot and levels is randomized every time you play, so you never know what the order of items and enemies is going to be. And as you might expect, getting killed means having to go all the way back to base, losing all of your weapons, all of your money, and having to start the entire stage over from level 1. So, what's the good and bad of Metal Unit? Well, for starters, I really like the game's variety. There's a decent mix of enemies and environments, a solid sampling of bosses for you to challenge, and a pretty good balance between exploration, combat, and platforming. But the thing that really stands out for me is the weapon selection. The game has a fantastic selection with over 100 different items divided between swords and axes, laser guns and grenade launchers, all of it divided into different categories and rarities. And while your basic weapons might only have minor differences between speed or damage, your higher level gear can have some truly unique effects. But what really elevates your inventory is the crafting system. As mentioned before, the game has a subsystem where you can use basic materials, typically low-level items and weapons, to craft better gear. These can then be added to your current inventory or used as further materials to craft even better gear later on. And even if you don't have all the materials you need, there's a secondary system where you can trash weapons and armor to get a random piece of equipment of the same grade. And what's really nice is that the game isn't miserly with loot. Every screen has at least one chest that you can pick up. And if you successfully beat a level, you can store excess items in your locker back at base. So you've got plenty of opportunities to synth new gear over the course of the game. Also, there's something I should mention, and this might be a benefit depending upon your playstyle, but the game has a very forgiving difficulty curve. Even though it's a roguelite, and even though you lose your entire inventory on death, getting sent back to the base is not as much of a punishment as it could be. For starters, dying gives you upgrade points. Normally, you have to defeat a boss in order to collect these, but every time you die, you get a few pity points as a consolation, which makes it easier to unlock passive abilities. On top of that, every weapon that you collect or craft is immediately added to your arsenal at home base. And so if you die, you're allowed to pick up any of your basic gear before you go back out on your next run, which means that getting killed is one of the few times in the game that you're able to fully customize your loadout. Now, as for downsides, I wouldn't say that the game has any explicit flaws, but there were some things that bugged me. For starters, the presentation is a sweet and salty mixture. I like the 2D art style, I like the pixel art aesthetic. I think there's a great variety of monsters and characters, and there's some fantastic looking boss battles. That being said, the game does have a readability problem. Between your melee weapon, your ranged weapon, your support gear, your super, it is very easy to just fill the screen with lasers and explosions. And in between all that, you still have to try and recognize and differentiate between enemy attacks, platforms, and projectiles, which can be hard to do when there are just so many effects on screen. Heck, even your jumping animation causes a little energy blast to shoot out from behind you. Now, granted, the game does try to help you out by making it so that all enemy projectiles have a glowing red outline, which would be nice, except that the level design doesn't always make it so easy. Stage 3 is a great example of this. It's a volcano level, which means that, guess what? All of the enemies, backgrounds, platforms, and environmental effects are surrounded by glowing red outlines because they're all made of fire and magma. Which means that between your projectiles and the enemies, it can often be hard to tell what's going on. The game also has some pacing issues. There's only 4 stages, each one divided into about a dozen different levels, but you'll probably need to play through them multiple times if you want to take advantage of the crafting system, because each stage has specific materials that you can only find in that environment. In addition, the game's cutscenes only play at the beginning and end of every level, and there isn't any other story interaction beyond that. Even though the game has a main base that you're sent back to after every area, it's entirely populated by nameless NPCs, and there's no opportunity to interact with any of the main characters at all. Still, in the end, I had a lot of fun with Metal Unit. The regular gameplay is solid with a tight mixture of platforming and 2D combat. The rogue-lite systems are very forgiving, and the crafting system honestly adds a lot to the experience. The ability to buy, sell, and synthesize new gear means that every playthrough you have a reliable source of new weapons and equipment. Even just breaking down extra guns can give you unexpected results. I would give Metal Unit 3 out of 4 stars. And I would definitely recommend it to anybody who's looking for an action platformer where swapping through a large list of arms and armor is one of the main mechanics. It's not as long or in-depth as other roguelites, but it's still a fun time. Alright, thanks for listening. It's time for me to suit up and ship off. Till next time.